a war of terrorism, a war fought in the shadows and then with bursts into the open, as was the case today. Joining us now from our CBS News Washington Bureau is the former Secretary of State for the United States of America, Madeleine Albright. Madam Secretary, thanks for being with us. How surprised are you about this attack today?
Well, we're all appalled, and as I watch all these pictures, Dan, we've all seen them all day long, and they are surreal. And watching the buildings come down and the attacks on Washington has been the nightmare scenario that people have feared for so long. I have to say, Dan, I ache for America tonight. We are a strong country, and I have faith that we will overcome this, but this is a huge challenge, and America must rise to the challenge.
Did you ever anticipate an attack of this scope?
We always, people talk about horrendous scenarios, but I don't think anybody has ever contemplated all the various pieces of this. As you have said, it is a highly sophisticated operation.
Who do you think was behind it?
I'm not going to speculate on that. You've been very careful in the coverage that I've seen, and I know that there are some reports that you are presenting, or your people, that it's Osama bin Laden. I think it's very important for us to get all the facts straight and investigate it and be sure. And I think calmness has to prevail, despite the fact that this is a highly emotional time for all of us, especially for the families of the victims.
And when it comes time to retaliate, when we have the facts, how will the United States retaliate?
Well, I think, again, we have the strongest military in the world with the finest servicemen and women. We have said in the past that we would retaliate at a time and place of our own choosing. I have complete faith in the military of the United States and in the leadership of America, and we all stand united. This is the ultimate evil.
This is Ernie Anastas reporting to you. We just want to bring you up to date now that all buildings south of Canal Street have been evacuated. Repeating, all buildings south of Canal Street have been evacuated. This is strictly as a precaution now. Police want to assess the damage in the area. It is strictly a precautionary measure. There is certainly much more to tell you about today. Lots going on. CBS 2 has reporters on the scene. We are at hospitals. We are with the mayor. We'll have a special report for you coming up tonight at 7:30. Right now, we invite you to stay tuned for more of a special edition of the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather. We'll be back joining you again at 7:30.
Human rights, can a statement like that be made? Because the United States has stood tall, has tried to deal with the horrendous problems, has done it in an honest way, and I am proud of American policies.
Madam Secretary, ride with me here for just a moment, because word from the White House is that President Bush is going to speak to the American people tonight before what has already been announced. It was previously announced he'd be speaking at 9 o'clock tonight, Eastern Time, 8 Central, 6 on the far Pacific coast. President Bush, now inside the White House, is moving up that time schedule. We don't know exactly when he's going to speak, but we are told that he will be speaking before 9 o'clock Eastern Time. So you may want to stay here with us to hear what the President says to the nation in his first major address. He's spoken to the country twice today, but both times shortly, brief remarks in Florida, then somewhat expanded remarks on videotape in Shreveport, Louisiana. But very soon, we're told, possibly soon, I should rephrase that, certainly before 9 o'clock, we're now advised the President's going to be talking. Now back to our conversation with the former Secretary of State for the United States, Madeleine Albright, and thank you for understanding about that, Madam Secretary. Madam Secretary, when you were in the inner councils of the Clinton administration, and it was decided to strike back at Osama bin Laden after the bombings of our embassies in East Africa, any second thoughts about the sending of those cruise missiles?
No second thoughts. We based our decision on facts that we had. For me, my worst moment as Secretary of State was the bombings of our embassies, and then going to pick up the bodies of those that had died, and also talking to the victims, the Kenyans and the Tanzanians. We had a responsibility to respond. We did it on the basis of facts, and we were at the beginning, I think, of what is this truly horrendous event when events abroad come home to America. And we have to stand tall. America cannot be shut down.
Former Secretary of State for the United States of America, Madeleine Albright, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Dan.
Now, there's going to be another briefing in Washington coming up soon. We'll carry that for you live, of course. But in the time we have remaining before that briefing starts, let's talk about the casualties from today's attacks. So much is still unknown. The 4 hijacked jetliners carried more than 250 people. We believe that figure to be 261. It could be a little more, a little less. And it must be assumed that all aboard those 4 hijacked planes are dead. So you start with at least 250, probably slightly more dead aboard the hijacked airliners. The Defense Department says, quote, about 100 were killed or injured at the Pentagon. David Martin says that it's widely believed at the Pentagon that that figure will increase, and perhaps significantly. It is far more difficult to account for the thousands who were in the target zone in Lower Manhattan, the World Trade Center area, and the emergency workers who rushed to aid them. Keep in mind, 50,000 people work in the World Trade Center tower in that area. Thousands more visited every day, and then today they flooded in police, fire, and other rescue workers fairly quickly. CBS News medical correspondent Elizabeth Caledon is at New York University Hospital tonight. Elizabeth.
Dan, within moments of hearing the news, New York City area hospitals and indeed hospitals throughout the region shut down all normal operations, canceled all elective surgeries, and basically transformed themselves into high-voltage trauma centers for a city under siege. Once the severity of injuries was assessed at emergency command posts at the site, dust-covered ambulances ferried those in the worst shape to whatever hospitals could take them.
No idea how many people and cops are dead. Many people hurt.
What about the casualties? What have you seen?
Uncountable.
Bellevue, one of the city's biggest trauma centers, treated injured when the World Trade Towers were bombed back in 1993. Today, it was deja vu. And despite the enormity of this disaster, the hospital says it was ready.
We've set up intensive care units. We're utilizing that area as sort of an offshoot of the emergency department. Just looking at every place in this hospital where patients could be taken care of, and we assign doctors and nurses to those areas to be ready for the patients as they come in.
Early in the day, the numbers started low, but by afternoon, it was clear the scope of devastation would be unfathomable.
As excavating goes on at the sites, we're going to probably, as we've been told, we're going to see a lot more.
Doctors anticipated every type of injury, everything from burns and smoke inhalation to head trauma, and a tremendous need for blood. In a situation where many felt utterly helpless, that was one way to contribute. An early call for blood led to lines of donors.
We anticipate a tremendous need for blood, so we actually set up several blood donor areas within the hospital for staff to donate. We've now run out of the donor bags for people to donate blood.
Again, Dan, and as you mentioned, the sense is here we are only just beginning to tally the number of injured. In fact, several of the doctors here told me that the injured they're seeing are, in fact, the emergency workers, the firemen and police who were called to the initial plane crash and then were injured when the buildings collapsed. Another major concern, of course, is not just handling the physical wounds, but the psychological trauma of witnessing and surviving such a catastrophe, and that is likely to yield thousands more victims in need of medical assistance, perhaps for years and years to come. Dan?
Elizabeth Caledon reporting live from New York University Hospital. The shock waves from the attack on America are being felt far beyond the immediate targets in New York and in our nation's capital, Washington. CBS News correspondents are standing by with that part of the story, beginning with Cynthia Bowers in Chicago. Cynthia, good evening.
Dan, as news of this catastrophic attack spread here in the Chicago area, so did the sense no place is secure.
I was scared. I was very scared.
Within minutes of the first reports, nearly 20,000 people poured out of the Sears Tower, the nation's tallest building, afraid it too was a target.
I would say a sense of anxiety, of nervousness, and people were anxious to leave the building.
Evacuations were ordered in the famed Chicago Loop, including the Board of Trade.
Everyone's concerned. You could see the look on their face.
One by one, federal buildings, museums, and colleges closed down. Extra trains were put on the tracks to get hundreds of thousands of people out of the downtown center, under the watchful eyes of military jets, with hundreds of police on the streets below.
Every sworn personnel in the Chicago Police Department, from the superintendent on down, will remain in uniform until further notice.
Security is so tight across the Midwest, passengers on this Delta jet in Cleveland were evacuated, while authorities made sure a threatened bomb was not on board. As business ground to a halt in Cleveland, workers heading home clogged roadways. Landmarks like the Arch in St. Louis were emptied.
I just felt like better than sitting home watching that, and this help me feel like I'm doing something.
And blood banks began to fill as the enormity of this catastrophe started to hit home.
I think we need to pray for our country and pray for our president because, you know, this is the national crisis that people have been talking about for years.
With Americans feeling so vulnerable, officials here in Chicago and everywhere tonight are walking a fine line between taking the necessary precautions without creating additional panic. Dan?
Cynthia Bowers in Chicago, and of course, buildings, some monument-type buildings were closed in Philadelphia. Los Angeles was on high alert around Los Angeles International Airport, and so it went today. Now, a briefing is scheduled inside the White House. This is the first actual briefing inside the White House we've had today. This will be Tommy Thompson, former governor of Wisconsin, who's now the Director of Health and Human Services in the Bush administration, John Ashcroft, the one-time senator from Missouri, who is now Attorney General, and FEMA Director Joe Albaugh. We take you live to the White House briefing room.
Mineta and Director Albaugh will each be providing you with updates on how their agencies are responding to today's events. As we'll be giving you as frequent as updates as possible, they will not be taking questions at this time. And with that, I will turn it over to General Ashcroft.
Thank you. Today, America has experienced one of the greatest tragedies ever witnessed on our soil. These heinous acts of violence are an assault on the security of our nation. They are an assault on the security and the freedom of every American citizen. We will not tolerate such acts. We will expend every effort and devote all the necessary resources to bring the people responsible for these acts, these crimes, to justice. Now is the time for us to come together as a nation to offer our support, our prayers for victims and for their families, for the rescue workers, for law enforcement officials, for every one of us that has been changed forever by this horrible tragedy. The following is a summary of the known facts surrounding today's incidents. American Airlines Flight 11 departed Boston for Los Angeles, hijacked by suspects armed with knives. This plane crashed into the World Trade Center. United Airlines Flight 175 departed Boston for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center. American Airlines Flight 77 departed Washington Dulles for Los Angeles, was hijacked and crashed into the Pentagon. United Airlines Flight 93 departed Newark for San Francisco, was hijacked and crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Crime scenes have been established by the federal authorities in New York, in Washington, D.C. area, in Pittsburgh, in Boston, and in Newark. The full resources of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the U.S. Attorney's offices, the U.S. Marshals Service, the Bureau of Prisons, the Drug Enforcement Administration, and the Office of Justice Programs are being deployed to investigate these crimes and to assist survivors and victim families. Thousands of FBI agents in all of the field offices across the country and in the international Legat offices, assisted by personnel from other Department of Justice agencies, are cooperating in this investigation. The FBI has established a website where people can report any information about these crimes. That address is www.ifccfbi.gov. That address again, www.ifccfbi.gov. ifccfbi.gov. Individuals can report any information